Welcome, and thank you so much for making the time to be here today at what is clearly a really stressful time for most of us. We did, in fact, consider rescheduling to a later date, but then we thought if doing this helps some philanthropist to collaborate with another or to find a partner to collaborate with, then the timing, in fact, could not be more opportune, which is why we decided to go ahead with it. Beyond this immediate crisis, of course, why is this portal important? And we've got today some incredibly good speakers to take us through, to literally navigate us through the portal. But if I can sort of just frame where the work that's gone into this, and it's taken a huge amount of effort, as you would guess, from Candid to actually bring together data from so many disparate sources and make sense of it in a user-friendly, fantastic interface. And I really want to compliment them on that. For CSIP, of course, this was an initiative that we were only too happy to support because it really advances all aspects of our agenda. We like to frame that as 4Cs: capacity, capability, credibility, and connectedness. And the portal, of course, contributes to each of those. There are some clear and obvious benefits to this portal. One of them, obviously, is just to help to make better decisions, more rational decisions, more data-driven decisions. I've often been perplexed by the willingness of philanthropists in particular, who in their business, when they're wearing their business hats, would never dream of making an investment without putting it through all the due diligence that they could, who are willing, when it comes to their philanthropy, to spend sizable sums of money without any of that due diligence. So, who else is funding work in the areas you're interested in? Who is interested in the geographies that you might be interested in? Which issues and geographies are most underserved? What are Indian donors supporting as compared to international donors? How is that changing? What gaps, if any, are emerging as a consequence? I mean, there's just a plethora of questions that I think that the portal finally starts to help us answer. But also, to improve efficiency, because we know, particularly in this pandemic, we've seen it, the lack of data means duplication, wasted resources, wasted time while you try to figure out who else is doing what you're doing. And the other impact, of course, of the pandemic is we were already lagging behind on the SDGs before this hit us. And we know already from the data that's coming in what kinds of setbacks we're looking at in terms of hundreds of millions of people pushed back into poverty, children whose education has been disrupted, child marriage, violence against women. So you know that we're now much further behind than we were this time last year. And so it's really critical that resources that we do have are more efficiently used. For nonprofits, of course, to be more easily, to have it within their grasp, to say who is funding the kind of things that the kind of work that we do. One of the questions, for example, that comes up in every conversation with nonprofits is, I work in the Northeast and nobody funds in the Northeast. So just for fun, I decided to go into the data and see who does fund in the Northeast. And it was interesting that in the 7 Northeastern states, I was able to find 91 grants, 900 grants that have been made in just the last 2 years. If I add Sikkim to those 7, then it goes up to over 1,000 grants. And so that's the sort of question. If you're a fundraiser or a grant maker trying to fund in that region, to be able to access who is funding, what are they funding, and how might I complement and supplement or collaborate with them becomes a critical question. And then for people like us, academics and researchers, and of course also for the media, to just make sense of the sector, to spot the trends and the gaps, to uncover insights into how Indian philanthropy philanthropists give. We've seen the benefits of having this kind of data in the CSR space. We've seen how that data has helped to move, to shift priorities. In the case of philanthropy, sadly, we're just, the media coverage, for example, is limited to, well, here's the top 10 givers, or Mr. Premji gave another $4 billion, that level of detail. And finally, an aspect that we don't talk about as much, which is, who are we as a sector? What's our identity? What's our collective scale? Who makes up this sector? Where are we making a difference? How much of a difference are we making? What's our contribution to GDP and to development? How do we compare with other countries? So there's, for me, this portal, as for a data geek like me, this portal is just this amazing treasure trove that I fancy. I've already been having fun diving into it. I hope that thanks to what we hear from our colleagues at Candid, we will be able to do that more effectively. So without further ado, let me hand you over to Zohra and Arif. Zohra is Vice President of Networks at Candid. She oversees the division, the Networks division, which comprises 66 departments and 55 team members. Essentially, her team ensures that Candid connects with social sector professionals around the globe to help them link up to information and resources that they need. A typical day in her role means managing relationships with something like 110 community foundations, insights members, 400 plus funding information network partners, and hundreds of allies from affinity groups, associations, and multilateral agencies around the world. Her team also delivers hundreds of online and in-person training programs to tens of thousands of people, leveraging Candid's learning sites, which are GrantSpace, GrantCraft, and Glass Pockets. Arif Ekram is the manager of global projects and partnerships at Candid and has really stewarded this project from its very inception. He is essentially focused on managing projects that strengthen philanthropy's capacity and that engages philanthropy with other development actors, and in promoting accountability and transparency in the philanthropic sectors. I'll hand you over now to Zohra and Arif.
Great. Thank you so much, Ingrid, for a warm introduction. And so good evening to our audience today, and thank you so much for making time to be with us today. Firstly, I wanted to acknowledge with great empathy the alarming COVID outbreak in India, and can appreciate if your attention today is stretched both across what's happening in your professional lives, as well as what might be happening at home. As Ingrid mentioned earlier, we wanted to maintain today's dialogue and conversation because despite what's happening, or in parallel to what's happening in your geographic region, and something that we're sharing across the globe as a global pandemic, if we felt that today's dialogue was necessary, timely, and important, and it might really help us to better inform how we can collectively, especially the funders and grant makers in the room, how we can all collectively better understand how philanthropy is supporting and how civil society is supporting, on how to combat COVID around the world, and of course in India. So just a little bit of a personal tidbit. You heard a lot of statistics in there in my bio. So thank you, Ingrid, for that. That was a tricky one to navigate. But I wanted to share a little bit on a personal level. When my colleague Arif, who you'll meet in just a moment, when he and I were planning Candid's engagement and participation in this conversation, I intentionally stated that I wanted to be a part of the dialogue, and that's for two reasons. One is our work in India is really a great example of how our organization is delivering on our own mission to getting the social sector the information that it needs to do good, of course, in partnership with wonderful allies and partners like the ones that are present here with us today. But I also wanted to mention that I have a personal interest in India. So I grew up I was born in Kabul, Afghanistan, and did migrate to the United States during the Soviet war. But I share that because although Bollywood exists in so many different corners of the world, my affection for India goes beyond just Bollywood movies. I grew up in a household where my father and my uncles were getting trained on the sitar and the tabla and the harmonium, and I was always listening to classical musics and the ghazals and rag. And so on my Spotify playlist, you'll find Pankaj Udas and Mehdi Hasan and Anup Jalota and Rafi and Lata and Mukesh, and of course all the newcomers that everybody loves, like Arjit Singh, which are great. But I'm just sharing that with all of you as a little bit of a personal backdrop to say that I feel like the Indian people in your culture have been such an instrumental part of my upbringing, and I'm rooting for you and cheering for you as you all combat like unprecedented numbers these days in terms of COVID. So I just want to acknowledge that and let you know my personal affection for India. And with that, I wanted to pivot quickly because we're here to have an engaging dialogue and an introduction of the platform. So just very briefly, I'll introduce Candid. Candid is a newly formed organization as of 2 years ago, but we're not new to the sector. It is a combination of two legacy organizations, Foundation Center and GuideStar, which with more than 80 years of collective experience working with philanthropy and civil society organizations. As most of you very well know, every year millions of nonprofits or NGOs spend trillions of dollars around the world. What Candid does is we find out where that money comes from, where it goes, and why it matters. And through research, collaboration, and also training, we connect people who want to change the world with the resources they need to do good. We feel that a lot of our data tools for NGOs and grant makers are some of the most comprehensive in the world. And the India portal, which you will be introduced to momentarily, is a great example of partnership with trusted entities in India, but also a great example of a carefully curated aggregation of our database applications and resources. And although our base in terms of office structure that we're not seeing because it's closed these days, our bases in the United States, our reach and efforts have expanded across the globe for more than a decade. And we really do feel that tackling the greatest challenges of our time requires grounding our approach in data, collaborating authentically, and navigating geographical and cultural boundaries to the best extent possible. So why India? Simply put, philanthropy in India is growing and as a high potential and large population market. There's significant room for making lasting impact through civil society and philanthropy. And with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Arif to further introduce himself and walk us through a demo of the portal. Thank you.
Thank you, Zohra, and good morning to everybody from New York. Ingrid, thanks for that great introduction. So like, I think that, introducing myself, that part has been taken care of. We don't have much time and I have a lot to cover, so I'm not gonna jump into that. Rather, let me just say that we very much understand what you're going through at this moment, because that's exactly what we went through about a year ago. So stay put, stay safe. Our thoughts and prayers are with you all. With that, let me share my screen because I want to demo the portal to you all. Sorry, not that. Okay, this one. So basically, as you know, this is the Philanthropy in India portal. That's the homepage, and this is the URL india.candid.org. And it has these 4 major parts: the dashboard, the funding map, reports and news, latest news section. And I'm gonna go through them, go through all of them one by one. But a quick overview of the homepage, if you scroll down, you'll see we try to keep it very simple and user-friendly. It also talks about the 4 major sections here. And what I wanted to show here is that on the homepage, there is this quick overview of the portal. If somebody, doesn't get a chance to listen to us today and not have it in a long time, because I know this is getting recorded, not have that long, hour or so time to go through it, I just recommend that you come here. It's available both in English and Hindi. You can take a quick look, and that should give you a good overall idea what is this about. The next thing I'm going to cover is the dashboard. It's basically a very good tool to have a snapshot of the Indian, philanthropy for these years from 2015 to 2018. That is, data stops at 2018 at this moment because that's the latest years of data, latest year of data that's complete or partially complete, I should rather say. And we have plans to add more years as those become available. It has all these different filters that you can see on the top. You can just, click on those drop downs and, select what you want to see. And those are pretty self-explanatory. These are different types of foundations, and you can use any combination that you want, and it should spit out the data for you to that combination. It gives you the totals at the top in two currencies, both in US dollars and Indian rupees, total number of grants, and then you can see a breakdown of subject focus. And on the right-hand side, you can see a breakdown of geo areas by different Indian states. And the darker the shade is, the more fund, went to that state. We can click on it, you can see a little bit more. If you click on it, it will give you even further details, which I'm going to show you a little later on foundation maps. Scrolling down, you can see a list of top funders and recipients. This is probably no surprise to anyone that Gates Foundation is at the top and by a lot. And that's pretty much the standard practice these days for pretty much any country. And on the right-hand side, you can see top recipients for India, and you can expand this list. It will go up to 25, and same for the recipients. You can expand it to see the top 25. And at the bottom, you can see the population focus, and you can hover over on any of these. It will give you more details, the number of grants, the total number, the actual amount of grants that went to that population or subject area. So this is also true for this, as you hover over, it gives you the details, it gives you the definition, and it gives you a breakdown by different types of funders. Let me just quickly select a combination. So it has both private and official by multilaterals, which is basically OECD DAC grants. So let's select private. Let's select funding from outside of India. And let's select, let's say, Delhi for all these years. And let's select just foundations. So it gives you the, as you can see, the total changes. It gives you these totals and this number of grants for these particular combination funding from outside of India, from foundation funders to Delhi for these years, and everything else changes accordingly. And I encourage you all to play with it, use those different combinations that you would like to see, like what's happening for those different types of funders and years and geo-destinations. But what I really want to, focus more today is this. This is called the foundation maps, which is basically this tab, funding map. So when you click on funding map, this is the landing page. This is where you come. And this is basically all the detailed data that you can think of when it comes to all those grants on philanthropy in India, and that we know of. And this is until present. So like the most data was that was put in this map was probably from 3 days or 4 days ago. So like this is as present as updated as it can be. And this starts from 2006 until present, and you can see all this different, total number of grants, total number of dollar value, and for both for foundation funding and for official funding. So this is the funding, map view. You click on it, it gives you the details. It gives you, so for this Uttar Pradesh, you can see all the total number of grants and and total dollar amount. If you want to click on it, it gives you more details. And I'm going to show you in a bit that how that more details look like. But first, let me just walk you through this. It has, so we are on map view now. Then if you click on it, this is the list view. So this has 4 tabs: funders, recipients, grants, and OECD DAC. So if you click on funders, you can see all the funders that have funded, India in, now or in the past, from 2006 to now. So we have over 11,000 funders in our database that funded India. Yeah, it includes both Indian and non-Indian funders. So let's go to this one, Reliance Industries Limited. So this is the total amount, and they have made 131 grants to different Indian recipients. And if you click on these details, this button, it gives you all the details of all those individual grants. So look, here you can see a list of 131 grants. And if you want to learn more, you click here and you see all the details that we know of. So this one, the recipient is unknown. So most likely either one of the 2 scenarios. First of all, we probably don't know about that recipient, or that recipient wanted us to anonymize them, so that we just use unknown, so that no one knows about them. So, and this is something that is important for some funders or recipients who wants to share their data, but not sure whether they should because of the sensitivity of their work. Or for funders, probably if they make their information known, there is, the fear that they will be inundated with unsolicited request of funding. And then that's absolutely fine. We have taken all that information and anonymized everything, so that at minimum, the sector knows that these primary subjects and population serves, these information are available, so that the picture of the sector becomes a little more complete, even with that anonymized specific information about a funder or recipients. So this one here went to higher education, and it went to Maharashtra. And you can see a little more the grant description that it went to this institute. And this is true for all these 131, and we have about 200,000 grant information in here, and this is for all of them. You can see all the details for all of them. The second tab is recipient, is basically the same information, but from a different point of view. From a recipient point of view, you can see go to grants data, grants tab. It'll, now this time it's gonna just give you all those grants. This is about 200,000 grants. And you can go to finally the OECD tab is from government to government. These are all, so you can see Japan is the top funder to the Indian government. Moving on to the next option, which is advanced search. So it has this one, you can 200,000 grants, that's a lot. 11,000 funders, that's again a lot of them. So you can narrow down your search using this advanced search option. This one is area served. There are 3 options. You can either look for recipients or funders or area served. Let's select area served. For this, let's select Delhi. Let's do a quick search for this one. So let's select Delhi. And let's select from the population service, a drop down. Let's say we select children and organization by name. Let's say Gates Foundation. And you can specify even further if you want, and you can hit show results. You go to funder view. It didn't pick anything. That's because it's too narrow. Let's get rid of children. So now you can see 28 grants made by Gates Foundation that went to serve Delhi. So you can specify your search in this way. And you can, as I said, you can go through all these details as much as you want, and that's very helpful. What I thought would be very interesting, and and this is basically a shortcut. The advanced search is basically a combination of all these top search options that you can see here. You can just go here and simply write down even a keyword. Let's say, let me just clear this selection, and by crossing them out, you can clear all the selection. Let me go here, and let's say, which is very relevant at this moment, let's say write down COVID, and you hit search button, and let's see what we get. So we are getting 95 grants made from 2000. So even though it says 2006, but you can see here is very recent, 2021. So this is very important at this moment. And that's the reason we, as Zohra and Ingrid was saying, we kept this webinar. We didn't reschedule it. This is very important. You can see who is contributing to fight COVID. And we could perhaps decide to collaborate with them if that's something we want. Or we can just decide, okay, Gates Foundation is funding this organization for this particular geographic area. How about we focus somewhere else, so that there is no duplication in efforts. So these are the funders who have been funding different COVID-related activities. I'm pretty sure the list goes, the list is a lot longer than what you can see here. And that, again, tells us the importance of sharing data, like why it's so important, especially in this kind of emergency, like why it's so important to share our data, especially our funding data, who is doing what and where, so that we can collaborate with each other, we can leverage each other's strengths, and we can mitigate each other's weakness. So this is probably very relevant for this moment. I'm going to clear this selection. Gonna go to charts view. It gives you an overview of the sector, philanthropic sector in India. This is the geo distribution. So like, as you can see, Delhi is getting the most funding in terms of dollars, followed by Bangalore, Mumbai. So these are the cities. And on the right hand side, the number is giving you the number of grants went to that particular geo destination. And you can also see a distribution chart which breaks it down by different subject areas. So as you can see, health is probably getting the most attention from the funders. And this is from 2006 to now, as I can remind you, followed by education. And you can select one particular subject area. Let's say we go to health, and it divides it even further down. So under health, there's public health, medical specialties, and so on and so forth. And you can take a look at that one. So like, you can dig deeper if you want. You can go even further if you want. It can break it down further for you. And lastly, the constellation, which basically gives you a mapping of the relationship between different funders and the recipients who are working in India. This one is, you can click all of them on these little bubbles, and it will give you all the details that you need to see. So this one is from Gates to Dasra. So you can learn a lot more if you want. So I think we don't have much time today. So I think I'm going to stop at that. And if you have any questions during the, we can definitely try to tackle those during the question and answer session. The other two parts that I didn't cover because of the time is the reports and news sections. And those are basically self-explanatory. Reports gives you the latest collection of relevant reports, and news section, gives you the a collection of relevant news articles for Indian civil society sector. I encourage you all to take a look. There's a lot to learn, and trust me, 20 minutes is not enough to cover the whole dashboard. There's a lot, and as Ingrid was saying, we took our time to build this. It's very detailed, and I hope you all dive in and take a look at it when you have a minute. And with that, back to you, Ingrid.
Thank you so much, Arif. Arif talked about the news section. I wanted to say that the Candid India portal news section is probably a better collection of relevant articles than you would get from your Google News alert. So if you're looking to really stay on, and it's as current, so if you're really looking to stay on top of what's happening in the sector, just that section alone is worth the dive in. So I want to add now two people to this conversation that scarcely need any introduction to a nonprofit audience in India. Aarti is a co-founder and partner at Sattva Consulting, where she heads the research, advisory, and programs practice, which works really closely with foundations, with multilaterals, and the whole ecosystem to deliver impact. She has over a decade of experience spanning consulting, research, content creation, and business leadership at Sattva. And of particular relevance to this conversation, Aarti is one of the small group of people across the country that spends a lot of time thinking about philanthropic data. They also did a study on everyday giving. So Sattva and Aarti are key players, if you will, in the data ecosystem in India. Amit, who needs even less of an introduction, is the managing director of Bain Capital and, of course, a renowned philanthropist. He has been a trustee of the Tata Trust, a founder board member of Ashoka University, where CSIP finds its home, a board member of Give India, the Akanksha Foundation, and numerous other organizations. Welcome, Amit and Aarti, and thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to start with you, Aarti, just because I know you're the other data geek on the conversation. How does this, just looking at this, how does it make you feel?
I mean, it's like this whole promised land after like ages, right? Like I can't recall the number of conversations had in rooms of funders, rooms of NGOs, where we said, where is the data? How do we make data-led decisions? To see that chart, and we would watch enviously when Candid had these charts about other countries, right? So to see that come alive for India just gave a huge sense of relief and gave a huge sense of optimism, because we made a start. Certainly is not perfect, and we know that we have a lot of that. I mean, it's still, limited by the data that is being shared, and to the extent that it is being shared, for sure. I'm sure we touch upon it, but it gave a lot of optimism in terms of making a start, and hopefully that leading to more sharing and more decision making both.
Thanks, Aarti. Amit, if I can ask you, sort of the core question. Why is this important? Why do we need better data on philanthropy in India? What, if you will, is the price we're paying as a sector for not having data?
Yeah. Thank you, Ingrid, for having me here. And first of all, thank you so much to Candid for doing this seminal piece of work. Where do I begin? I mean, first of all, this was a mind-blowing demo. The time for doing something like this was 10, 20 years ago, and so the urgency of this cannot be stressed enough. There's just so much, Ingrid, to answer your question. There's so much of suboptimality in what we do as both donors and as NGOs, and I think data can be an extremely valuable tool in getting us to be far more efficient, as well as I think data can be a very, very efficient tool into shaping us to do things that we are not doing. I think the pandemic in many ways has shown us a mirror on many aspects on how collaboration can be extremely critical. I mean, every day we've put together a COVID task force in the first wave that's even becoming more useful in the second wave. Many of us came together and we are pooling resources. It's helping us, do things, together, pool resources. That's the value of it, right? It's helping us do things better, because sometimes the answer to doing something comes from someone else in the network. And importantly, it helps us reach areas which one of us would never be able to reach. And all of that, if it's done via a platform, could be hugely valuable. This time around, again, we're all realizing that data can be so valuable in just simply figuring out how you could allocate resources. We are experiencing the great oxygen madness. Oxygen is needed to keep us alive, but we are realizing that it's not just manufacturing of oxygen. Actually, the biggest issue is distribution of oxygen. Everyone's focusing on one part of the problem and not focusing on other. That's where data comes in. It tells you where do you really need demand, where do you need supply, and how do you bridge it. So data is incredibly valuable in all of that. It's the same issue when it comes to, philanthropic funding. You talked about, Zohra talked about it, Arif referred to it as well. There are overserved sectors relatively, and then there are so many underserved sectors. There are overserved areas, there are underserved areas. Data can be hugely valuable in helping philanthropists decide that, but very importantly, help players, many of whom have logged into this area, get valuable funding to meet their needs. So I think data is extremely, extremely valuable when presented efficiently, quickly, and everybody doesn't need to be reinventing the wheel in process of trying to, find that data.
So then the tough question, Amit, why are philanthropists in India so reluctant to share their data, and how can some of these obstacles be overcome?
Ingrid, I think there are different reasons. I think in some cases, people genuinely are afraid to share data because they're worried, about, and I think Arif referred to this in his points. I mean, they're just worried about being pinged excessively, about being harassed. And so I think there may be genuine reasons, but I do think in a lot of cases, people hide behind smoke screens. It's very easy to buy a badge of honor and be called a philanthropist. I don't like being called a philanthropist. You can give, a small amount of money and be called a philanthropist. It can be a small amount relative to your net worth or your income. I think if there's data and transparency, many people will be exposed. And I think we need data for that. There's nothing like data, it's like sunshine. It disinfects a lot of things. So I think a lot of people hide behind that. If there is a lot more data out there, I think you can create a spirit of competition. It'll also, by the way, make people think about the efficiency with which people also, it's not just competitive in terms of how much money you're giving, but people also think about, are they giving money efficiently? Are they giving it to different, to the right areas? Are they all, overcrowding certain areas? So I do think that if you have data out there, you'll see some very interesting things happen.
Thanks, Amit. Aarti, you work with all kinds of grant makers as well as nonprofits. How do you sort of envisage, in concrete terms, how would a grant maker and a nonprofit actually use this portal?
Yeah. A couple of years ago, we were partnering with a global organization to do a survey with Indian, foundations and domestic philanthropy to actually understand what is the quantum of domestic philanthropic giving outside of CSR, right? Because CSR has to be reported. And we realized that what we wanted to finish in 6 months took us 1.5 times that the time, and it's the same 10 people, people like Amit ji and the same other 10 philanthropists who came back and said, okay, data is very critical and let's share it. And for many of the others, there was just we realized that while what Amit ji said, right, like the hesitation because you might get harassed, you might get called up a lot is one part. We also realized that in a lot of the cases, funders don't track it, even internally. So it isn't even part of the organizational way of doing decision making, which I believe is actually something that, if a platform like this can hopefully start to encourage, right? Like, what am I doing internally? How do I then look at my philanthropy giving in relation to what is happening in the country and where there is most need? And the third is, we also realize that the types of systems that are there, right? Like, how do you even quantify something, and how do you then ensure those systems it gets captured on a regular basis is also missing. So while there is the whole mindset level, there is also a very transactional systems level, because of which it is not being tracked today. And I really hope that this kind of a platform is therefore being able to encourage, because I feel like it's as much internally useful for grant makers as much as it is something that can give back as a public good for everybody to benefit from. And cannot stress more in terms of what it can do for collaboration. I mean, we work with, like Amit said, the Ag Grants is another effort that's working on COVID. And literally, people are sharing all of their data and the data that they come to know about from everybody to just be able to raise money to allocate oxygen in the most far-flung parts of the country. And literally overnight, nobody has said no to sharing data, what they'd want to give, what they know that somebody else is giving, and so on. So it's really something that then is allowing us to collaborate, allowing us to pool resources to the right places. So I feel like these are very critical elements. And if you see the difference between how CSR data is reported and what data we have on sustainability for the same entity, right? Like, even though we can go a longer distance with CSR data, but it's allowing so much more decision making and discussion based on data that sustainability we really know nothing about, although the organization may be equally paying attention to this. So I feel like that's another place. Three is, but I feel like with NGOs, particularly NGOs that may not be able to access funders at a global or a national level, being able to understand what is the local funding available, who is willing to support me locally. Remember, we have this platform internally that tracks CSR data. And I haven't seen, there was an NGO leader that we were talking to and showing this. And he said, can you click zoom in, zoom in, zoom in? And he went to Sitamarhi district, and he said, and his eyes lit up. He said, this is the data that I need, because I don't want to know what is happening throughout the country. I want to know who are the two people. It's two people, it's okay. I'll know that, my efforts, 90% should be with my community. The 10% I can go tap into these two people and make a plea for them supporting me. So I think local philanthropy to local efforts and NGOs being able to tap in, because it's really not going to be possible to have resources to do a widespread kind of a fundraising. So I think these are the compelling use cases.
Certainly a fundraiser's dream. I can remember, trying to put together a prospect list if you're a fundraiser is so hard given the lack of data. But this would save you months of time and misspent effort. So there are a bunch of questions, Arif, around the data itself, and I'm going to sort of ask you about them. One is, this is from Nelson Amaya at the OECD Center on Philanthropy. Hi, Nelson. His questions are, how do you make sure you're not double counting transactions between donors or recipients of these donors? And why are there so few non-CSR donors sharing open information in India?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's a very common question that we get, that how we ensure that data is not double counted, how we ensure the quality of the data. And we have multiple checks in place to make sure of that. So first of all, we collect data only from grant makers. So that's, number one. So like, we don't collect it from grant makers and grant seekers, the recipient NGOs, right? So like, there is one check is coming from only one source. Secondly, we validate each grant, every single grant, one by one. We used to do it manually, like even 4 or 5 years ago, and it was, as you can imagine, it was a very laborious process, but we never shied away from it. But now we go through, artificial intelligence, which is then, further, scrutinized by manual intervention. So those are some of the process that we follow to make sure that it's never double counted. There are a few other steps which are a little more specific to make sure that it's never double counted. Is like if, for example, for if you you select a subject area, let's say you select education, then it kind of aggregates all of them, right? So in that case, for the aggregate, everything is counted once. It takes all those grants one by one. It look at all those hundreds and thousands of grants in a millisecond and take all those that match your criteria that you selected. And then it goes through another round of it to see if there is duplication within themselves. Like, let's say 2 funders collaborated to make one grant. In that case, it will automatically make sure that that grant is counted once. So like there are multiple checks and balances. The second question, why the funders are a little conservative in India, and I think they're, based on my experience, and and to be honest, I'm working, for Indian philanthropy. It's not been more than 2.5 years. So like I wouldn't claim that I know everything. But based on what I have seen, is there are multiple reasons. Number one being, and if I may say that, the understanding that how critical is data, the importance of data, right? So like we all talk about the importance, we know it's kind of important, but actually really internalizing it, like it can be a game changer, right? So and that's the reason I think this dashboard is so important, because you can see how it's making a change, because seeing is believing, right? And the other thing is, there is probably this tendency, like who will go first, right? Like, okay, there's like, okay, you do it. And the other person is like, no, you do it, then I'll probably follow. So I think that's also happening a bit. So what I think is gonna take to break that barrier is like, what happened when they're taking the Berlin Wall down, right? If I may give that example. So like what happened is, like, first a few people took their chisels and hammers, then they started to build the wall, and then they saw a whole bunch of people came together and started banging on the wall, and then they took it down. I think something like that needs to happen. We probably need a few funders at the beginning. We'll start sharing that data, and then everyone will say, okay, it makes sense, and probably they will join it. I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
Just 2 more questions, Arif, on the data. One is, I don't know if you want to spend a minute just talking about the sources of your data. What are all the different sources that you capture? And the second one is a very specific one, which is, there are a couple of questions asking, is organization building a thematic area in your set of thematic areas, or do you only look at things like health, education, livelihoods, and so on?
Okay, those are good questions. So for in terms of sources, we are collecting data from multiple sources. When it comes to data from outside of India, so the vastly, a majority of the data that you'll see on this platform is coming from US funders. And when the funders are US based, we got the data either directly from that funder, who reported that data to us, was something we call e-reporting. We send them a template. There's this mechanism, they fill the template, they give us that data, and then we put it in our database. And of course, it goes through multiple cleaning process. And the other would be we getting data directly from IRS, which is the Internal Revenue System of the US. So the US law says if you want to keep your tax exempt status as a foundation, you must report all your foundation, all your funding data to the IRS, and that is publicly available information. We'll go into IRS website and we'll get that and we'll clean it, we'll index it, and we'll make it usable, and we'll put it in our database. When it comes to data outside of US and outside of India, so which is the majority of that data is coming from Europe and mostly Western Europe, that is coming through the same mechanism, which we call e-reporting. We got that data directly from those foundations, and same is true for Australia, parts of Asia and Africa. When it comes to India, we got that data from mostly the government sources, so the CSIP database and the FCRA database. We took all that data, we cleaned that data, we indexed it, we applied the taxonomy that we use to that data, and then we kind of aggregated all of them and presented it on the dashboard. The second question is the thematic areas. So when it comes to a particular thematic area, it needs a bit more customization. So let's say you are particularly interested in early childhood education, which is a little more focused than what you would see on the dashboard. So we have done work like that in the past with many foundations. In fact, the example that's coming on my mind right now is Oak Foundation, which was done very recently. They were interested in what is happening around industrial meat production, because industrial meat production is one of the most contributor to the carbon dioxide production. So like was interested in that thematic area, like who are the recipients, what's happening where, who are the other foundations. And the approach we took with them is that we did a custom search of our database to look into what's happening. This kind of tool is, even though it's very disaggregated and can be very detailed, but when it comes to this very specific thematic area, it needs a little more customization. And if somebody's interested in that, we recommend that they can get in touch with us and we can figure out what can be done. You're on mute.
Sorry. You would imagine after a year of doing this, we would get better, but no. So Amit, coming back to you, what is your one message to the funders and representatives of funders who are on this call? What is it that you would really like to say to them?
So Ingrid, I would say, first of all, I would urge people to populate their data. I was busy while this was happening, asking my team whether we've actually populated our data on the site. I think the more it's like I guess many of the apps that all of us use, the more people put their data on, I think that the site is going to get richer in terms of user experience, and we're going to get more out of it. I posted a question as well for you to ask Zohra and Arif whether they've approached Edelgive and the Hurun team to see whether the giving list for India has been approached in a systemic way, because then you don't have to approach people individually, and they can collaborate with them to get all their data uploaded. And it would be great to be able to do that. I think the more people upload their data, I think it would be great, because I think there's a reasonable chunk of funders who could benefit from seeing their data up there. It would help them do things better. Sometimes we assume that funders don't want their data. I don't think all funders are like that. I know there are people like Rohini who are very progressive, Ashish Dhawan, who are very progressive. There are a whole bunch of people who are very progressive and would love to, collaborate and have their data up there. And at the same time, I think, the moment that data is up there, the not-for-profit space would benefit enormously from being able to know who to go to in a more systematic way. So I think my plea would be to, get people to get data out there. There'll be a tipping point. I think, I don't know whether that number is, 10% of the top, 500 donors, or it's 20% or 30%, but we'll get to a tipping point when a certain percentage of people really put their data out there.
Thanks, Amit. And I see we're coming to the end of our time, but there's one question that maybe Zohra, you can answer. Somebody's asking about, besides this kind of data, what else does Candid do?
Yeah, great question. So we do a lot in terms of training and capacity building, and often with relation to accountability and transparency. We also offer a lot of thought leadership pieces in partnership with organizations around the world, and in the case of India, with India partners. In fact, for the funders who are in the audience today, we are launching tomorrow a Funding Smarter course at Candid. So it's specifically oriented towards grant makers, and it's meant to be it's a free course. You can register for free. It's meant to be an internal tool of other resources within Candid that grant making organizations can take advantage of. Keep in mind, some of the resources in there might be at this time a little bit US centric, but we feel that might be a good start to helping, especially the funders in the audience, understand the diversity of the tools that we have at Candid.
Thanks, Zohra. I should mention that Candid has one of the best aggregations of all COVID responses, philanthropic responses to COVID around the world. So they've really pulled data from all over the world into this, one-stop shop, if you will, where you can actually see this, as well as I recall, they've actually looked at all the research that's happened on the impact of COVID on nonprofits and kind of done almost a meta research. So it's a compilation of the compilations kind of thing. So there's some fantastic resources there. Don't want to sound too much like I love Candid, but I can't.
Okay, if you do. Thank you.
I'm going to close this conversation, though I'm sure we could spend the rest of the evening delving deeper into this. All I can say is we're beginning to put together in India this edifice of knowledge about philanthropy and civil society. And this piece, the Candid India portal, is a huge leap in that direction. There are other pieces that add to it. There's Sattva's report, CSIP does reports, Dasra and Bain do reports, and so on. And so there are other pieces of knowledge that will add to this. But this is such a significant step in whoever you may be. You might be a student who's interested in understanding the sector better. You might be a journalist who's looking to write a story on the sector. We can all just be better informed and therefore make better decisions and just be better at our jobs. And hopefully therefore be better at achieving impact collectively, because there has never been a time when we need to do that more meaningfully, more substantively, more effectively. Thank you to all of you for making the time, as I said, at this really stressful time. It's been a pleasure talking to Zohra, Arif, Amit, and Aarti. Thank you all.
Ingrid, if I may,
sure.
Thanks a lot for your partnership. I really appreciate it. And for everyone else, this platform probably wouldn't be possible without the valuable partnership and insight that we got from CSIP. So thanks for that. We really appreciate that. And thanks for organizing this webinar today.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Thank you all.